Welcome to the Virtual Stab Comedy Theater. It's time for the 6 o'clock Dad Rock Talk. Please welcome to your screen all the guys.
Hello, folks at home. Welcome to 6 o'clock Dad Rock Talk. I am Corey Behringer, joined as always by Court Hansen. And for our first ever special guest on 6 o'clock Dad Rock Talk, RJ Hill. How you guys doing?
Hey, good. Boys are back in town.
Hey, I'm doing pretty swell.
Well, we are just absolutely thrilled to have you here, RJ, seriously. Particularly because I think we're starting the whole guest thing right with the ultimate fan of something. Because that was sort of the idea that we had as far as having guests on the show, was like, find someone who's uber passionate about a specific thing and then bring them on and just let them go hog wild.
Yeah.
And your thing happens to be something that is a lot of people's thing, but also a lot of people's most hated thing, and that is the Grateful Dead.
Mm-hmm.
We are talking about the Grateful Dead this week on the show. Gonna start right off with a softball here for you. When did you first become acquainted with Grateful Dead, and what was it about that got you hooked?
Well, okay, so I was actually acquainted on 2 occasions. The first time was I was in high school, and I was just sort of like expanding. I had like a Black Sabbath obsession from 7th grade up until my freshman year. So around my sophomore
It's definitely the age to have that.
yeah. So around my sophomore year, I started expanding greater into like more like 60s music and stuff like that.
Mhm.
And I used to browse all music guides, and Oxomoxo had like 4.5 stars. I was like, well, fuck, I'll listen to this first. And then, so I listened to it, and the first track that was on there was Saint Stephen, and it had just such a ripping solo, and it just sounded so like rockin'. I was like, oh, this is sick. I didn't really get into the rest of the album. And then as time went on, I started getting into more like cooler things. And then sort of with that came the, just sort of the natural, like dislike of the Dead.
Distrust.
Yeah, the distrust that happens. Sort of like, ooh, you know, I'm not going to listen to a bunch of fucking hippies.
Yeah, the ugly connotation that comes with jam bands in general, really.
Yeah.
Oh,
Not
yeah.
just Dead, but yeah.
So fast forward to, oh gosh, I think it was I worked at the Dimple off of Broadway. It's the Broadway bookstore. Court was getting into the Beach Boys, and I was getting back into the Beach Boys, and Court was talking about a show that the Beach Boys actually played with the Dead when the Dead had a run at the Fillmore East in '71. I think it was 427, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, 427.
He was talking about that, and I was like, oh, hey, you know, I listened to them a bit in high school, and weed was legal, and I was like, well, let's just give this another shot. So I got really high, and I listened to the Dead, and I was like, oh, I actually like this. And then I went back to it sober, and then I was like, oh, I still like this. And then it's just been a downhill slope from there, but like a fun downhill slope.
Like a snowy slope.
Exactly, but that's how I got acquainted, was basically
Yeah.
the Court.
Yeah.
That stoned experience, were you bouncing around a bunch of different tracks, or was it one album in particular that you put on?
Just sort of bouncing around, getting the feel for like live stuff and all of that. I started with what I knew, basically. So I went back to like Saint Stephen, and then I would Google you know, best Dead shows of X year or whatnot, and I just kind of went from there. You know, whatever year or era that it fascinated me, I was like, oh, let's try this and this and this, and you know, you just sort of like going more and more into it, and yeah. But then after, you know, with my high experiences, mostly listening to like a lot of the 60s stuff that they were doing, and then when I went back and revisited, I was listening to a lot of like Europe 72 and a lot of 74 stuff, and eventually going into the 80s and all of that. So it's a roller coaster of music.
Yeah.
Is it fair to say that you were probably mostly devouring like live bootleg stuff, or were you also getting into the albums as well, like studio stuff?
So the thing with a lot of jam bands, because I'm a fan of both the Dead and Fish, but the thing with a lot of jam bands is that sort of a lot of the studio albums can be really good, and I think the studio albums you should listen to, just because with bands like the Dead, or
Yeah.
they're not they're jamming, but they still have these like flag posts at their meeting. So like they have a song and they've written it, and when you listen to the studio albums, you get acquainted with those flag posts are, and sometimes that the way that they composed in the studio, they're pretty solid takes. The Dead wasn't always really good in the studio, but when they were on, oh man, they were on, and so I went back and forth. I did both the studio and then I did Live Dead because they're two different experiences for me. But now, because I know Studio Dead pretty well now, for me it's mostly just Live Dead and finding a show and just.
It's kind of like with the studio stuff. It's like you're not gonna find many like production flourishes, except for on the first maybe like 5 or 6 albums. There's like interesting things in the mixes, but it's not like some groups where the production in the studio is like a part of the sound. A lot of the production is kind of just like very bare bones, just getting it on tape.
Yeah, we're making perfect record of this thing we've created, so then we can go off on tangents.
But you do have stuff like Oxomoxo or Anthem of the Sun, and those have that mix of live tracks that have overdubbing on them, which they do in later live stuff too. But it's there are some interesting production things on those that I think is worth listening to. I think are worth listening to if you're into like noise music and prog and things like that. There's stuff to dig into with the production there.
Or even like a heavy psych with Anthem of the Sun. If you get into the original mixes of that, which were recently re-released for I think the 50th anniversary, but because they were starting to mess around with a lot of new technology at the time and stuff like that, and a lot of those tracks are super heavy psych. They're on par with a lot of like what gets listed as quintessential acid rocks, like Quicksilver Messenger Service or like Iron Butterfly or anything like that. I think just because when they started like writing songs later, they remixed everything, and a lot of that heavy psych charm, it seems to have been lost. But they were competing with a lot of the psych big leagues at the time, and I don't know, it's interesting.
Well, what we're gonna do today on the show is, whereas normally on the show, Court and I both present a playlist and then we bounce back and forth, completely random to us. We don't know what Jesse's going to choose. This time's a little different since we have a guest. We've asked you to curate your playlist, your sort of dream choice cuts of the Dead, and so you're gonna guide us on a little trip. That's what this week's going to be. So tell us a little about this first track that we're going to listen to.
So when I was making this playlist, it was really hard to just narrow it down to like a certain number, because I was like, oh yeah, I'll make it like 50 tracks, and it'll be these huge long jams, and then we'll take like 5 hours. It'll be great. So this first one, I decided to make it first because it was the first song that I listened to by the Dead, and it's Saint Stephen. And because I figured we were going Live Dead, I picked I think the classic live rendition of it, which is they had a run at the Fillmore West from February 27th to March 1st in 1969, and they recorded those on a 16-track multi-track, which is something that they had to persuade Warner Brothers to get them to loan. So they recorded these shows, and they have complete soundboards out. But I picked this one, specifically the part at 3:30, because that's what struck me as like, oh, this is good, and I really like this.
Is this from the Live Dead album, or is this?
It's from the Live Dead album.
Okay.
So this one goes into the 11, and then Turn on Your Love Light and stuff like that. But I picked 3:30 to the end specifically because that was the part that hit me the most when I was in high school, and then again. Nice. So I think we should just give it a listen real fast.
Let's go.
Wrap the babe in scarlet covers, caught in your arms. Now, oh, did you try? Answers are plenty in the by and by. Talk about your plenty, talk about your ills. One man gathers what another man spills.
I guess we could
What are
probably
some standout moments in that to you?
the drum hits easily, and when they come back in with the song, because the part that I chose, so Saint Stephen was like a whole composition. The part that I chose was the end of the bridge going back into the main song. What stood out to me was just this full force of everybody coming back in at the same time, which has always been powerful to me in terms of like rock and roll and whatnot. But I think with that in particular, just because with the setup they were operating at, which was two drummers, having the two drummers and then with the traditional like tube distorted guitars and stuff like that, really hit me because it was just super loud, and it's what I liked in rock music, because I like loud and I like distortion, and I love stuff like that. And when you just come in all at the same time again to go back into the solos, it's just like, oh man, this is good. And then I don't know, the lyrics are pretty nice for me too, like did he doubt or did he try after splitting the by and by. Like I have those burned in my brain now. And I don't know, they're just fun lyrics that make you think, and it's just a good rock song. Like if I was trying to get anyone into the Dead, I would just show them this, and I would show them like the entirety of Live Dead, because the album Live Dead, because it's just good rock music. It's just so good. And I don't know, it just, Jerry was using an SG at the time, which has just a different sound than anything he was using after that. It's a lot of warm, heavier tones than out of the Stratocasters and whatnot he would use later on.
I've always considered the SG to have like a more ferocious tone
Yeah.
than others, and it's not even always my favorite. Like I don't usually prefer an SG, like certainly playing them, but like
I have a hard time playing them.
Sometimes like they are exactly what is needed. Like they have that ferocity to them that just is unparalleled.
And at the time, especially in this era of the Dead, so 68, 69, Dick Latvala, to name drop and stuff, he called this...
we should explain who Dick is.
I'm a babe in the woods.
Okay, so, so Dick Latvala, he was hired on to be the Grateful Dead archivist in 86, and he was living in Hawaii and trading tapes, and he had like an insane knowledge about Dead shows from 67 to God knows, pick a date, he can probably tell you about
till probably he was hired.
Yeah. And so he was hired to basically organize the Dead stash of 2-track reels, because they recorded every show, just for record keeping sake. And but they would store them, and then they didn't really care what they did, because they're like, oh yeah, whatever, we'll just go on to the next show. So Dick comes in and he, oh gosh, excuse me, I'm sorry. He reorganizes the vault, and he pulls out a lot of stuff, and he was a tape trader. And he sees things that are like, oh, wow, people would love soundboards of these. And eventually what happened in the Grateful Dead headquarters is they came up with something called Dick's Picks. I think we've all seen that Hard Times article, the Dick's Picks. So they come up with that, and it's just him going through the vault trying to find soundboards that people have been wanting for years, and they're just publishing them on CD. And for the longest time, from when he was hired up until his death in around 99, he was sort of considered the end-all be-all of like Dead knowledge. So if you ask a question to Dick about like the Dead, if he says something about it, I mean, everybody has their own opinions, but sort of what he said is sort of became canon in terms of like his quality Live Dead. Obviously, he has a lot of disparaging opinions that I think if you were around today, he would question a lot of like releases now. But
what? Elaborate on that. What do you mean?
Oh, so actually, a good example would be 5877. So
that's Cornell, right?
Cornell, yeah. So that is if you're talking to anybody about like a Dead show, that is like the Live Dead show that everybody has. When I started getting into it later in life, the first show I listened to in full was 5877. And the reason why, first of all, that one is well known is because that is one of the few shows that we have where there is a first generation reel. So the way that tapes were traded is that they're done in generations, and the further down you go as people re-record and redub them, the quality fades.
Yeah.
But with these shows in particular, we had the original reels that were just kind of found out of nowhere one day, and they were published and all of that. And it's a very easy show to get a hold of when you start trading. So Dick, actually, I was Googling one day, just sort of like best shows of 77 when I was getting into the Dead, and I just saw a forum post from him, 10 shows better than 5/8/77, and he just goes through and lists like every other show on the spring tour that year except that one. And but that show got released. That show I got a full blown like box set and everything.
Yeah, it's a really nice box set.
It's cool and stuff, but he would be like, oof. And then another example would be for Record Store Day, I think 2019, the Dead put out their 43-minute version of Playing in the Band.
Yeah.
Dick hated that one. He was just like, not hated, but he was just like, it's 43 minutes. That's great. I can think of a bunch of other shows that are better than this.
43 minutes of Playing in the Band is, especially when Donna's still playing in the band, is tough.
And I've listened to it, and it's like, okay, guys, I get it. And then you just kind of fast forward, and then it's like, oh, there's feedback. Fast forward. Oh, there's a wah pedal.
Yeah.
So,
I don't love I don't know if I'm just being contrarian or what, but I still don't really love the Cornell show, 5/8/77. It's like just fine. It sounds like peak, or it just sounds like the average of like 77 Dead.
What do you think it is about it that is the appeal then to the broader
the quality of the recording, right?
Is it just
So actually, I actually have a 5/8/77 show on the playlist. Can we cue that?
Oh yeah, we should do that.
Everything.
We can
we'll talk maybe.
Yeah.
Well, Jesse gets that set maybe.
Yeah. While he gets that cued, I guess we can just talk more about that. Yeah, it's the appeal to it definitely is. There are magical moments, I think, and like the track that I actually picked in particular, because when I was making this playlist, I was thinking about how would I get people into the Dead, and a lot of people who are into the Dead, they sort of get jaded about that show, which is understandable, and it is. There are better shows on the spring tour than this show. The day after, or even the day before, were, I think, like standout phenomenal, and oh my god, I can listen to them forever. But I think with 5/8/77, there are moments in there that are really special. And the track that I picked in particular was the Scarlet Begonias going into Fire on the Mountain, because that's just phenomenal playing. They had just really started playing Fire on the Mountain with Scarlet, and
now those are like thought of as the same thing pretty much, as one entity, like Sam and Eric from Lord of the Flies.
Yeah, like when you trade tapes or you read old J cards, if there's like a Scarlet Begonias Fire on the Mountain, it just says Scarlet Fire. Or if you tell somebody this was a Wicked Scarlet Fire, they know what you're talking about and stuff.
Yeah,
there is where Scarlet doesn't come with fire even after 77, but that's very, very rare.
And for the confused viewers at home, Jesse, our producer, has a list of RJ's picks, and it includes like descriptions of things like Scarlet Fire, and that's denoted with like a little, greater than symbol, or is it a less than symbol?
It would be a greater than.
One of those little arrow symbols, and it'll like have one song name, and then it'll have the little alligator, and then the next song name, and that's how on tapes and stuff it'll denote that the songs flow into one another, as opposed to like one song ending and another beginning.
I don't know if you can
there we go.
But Dark Star and stuff like that. That's how they denote it. It's so much easier.
I didn't want to start nothing, but I don't know if you guys are looking in the chat. Lunardi Trip. Lunar Day Trip. What am I saying? Lunar Day Trip chiming
Lunardi.
in. There's no capitalization or it's Lunar Day Trip. Chiming in, telling you guys to leave Donna alone.
No, I like Donna.
I love Donna.
Donna's great. It's just a 45-minute playing in the band is a lot for anybody, and probably a lot even for her. So I don't have any real problem with Donna Jean Godchaux. I just think that that's a long time for a song that I don't particularly like.
Oh man. But yeah, since we were talking about, I love Donna. She's great singer, and when she harmonizes with Bob, she's on top. But
Yeah.
Do you want to play just a little bit of the Scarlet
Yeah.
Fire?
I think he's got a cue.
Cool.
How much longer we go?
Probably go just another few seconds. You can stop at any time, really.
That was about the minute. I'm still trying to get him about a minute or so.
Okay. But yeah, no, that I love that 5/8. I love that version of Scarlet Begonias. There's a lot of versions that I really like, but that one in particular is sort of like, it's just so good. It's like one of the quintessential recordings of that particular song sequence in general. And I think in that bit, you can hear the interplay of just everybody sort of like letting loose and jamming, and I think that's really cool to hear, especially in something like this too, because there is a song structure and they know where they want to go with it, but it's just sort of like, it's kind of like driving. If you're going from point A to point B and you know how to get there, but you know like 5 other routes,
Mm-hmm.
you know, you can take whatever route you want. And it's when you start listening to more Dead, you just sort of start isolating the different parts in your head, if that makes sense.
Mhm.
So like when I was hearing just that particular portion of Scarlet Fire back again, I was listening to Phil's portion and his bass playing while he was playing on top of like Jerry and Bob and all of that stuff. And when I got like into the Dead, the first things I started doing was listening to Phil's parts and listening to Bobby's parts. And that's really cool because they do this like, it's a sort of like interchange, and I think they let everybody sort of gets their own voice, and that's really hard for in like a jam band. And even with the Dead, there's times where that doesn't actually come through, or it's clearly just like Jerry soloing and then everybody else following, or somebody's coked out, and you know, when he gets to the 80s, somebody is coked out in one way or another. Excuse me, don't drink beer, kids. Anyways, but yeah, no, you hear the interplay there, which I think is great, and it's a really slow, laid back recording, which especially 76, 77 Dead, because they were transitioning from having just one drummer so they can play as fast as they want to having 2 drummers, which sort of changes how the band has to play. Because with one drummer, they can change beat on a dime and they can just sort of do whatever. And a lot of 73, 74 shows would go way out there in terms of music exploration. Because
yeah, that's probably my favorite period is 73, 74.
That's definitely what sold me on the Dead. The track that we have on here, the China Rider, is like 100% what made me realize as an adult. I was like, oh, this is good.
Let's get back to that then. Like, while we're still talking about what it was that sparked you, let's get China Rider queued up.
Yeah,
we should talk a little bit about the various members of the group.
Yeah,
beginning with founding member John Mayer.
I have a sticker somewhere with his face.
I stole that joke from the 36 from the Vault podcast. I'm sorry. I felt bad.
My favorite member is And Company.
Oh,
That's
and
my favorite. I think he really brings it home.
and D Company.
The ampersand gets the gets a huge.
Okay.
part there.
So members of the Dead, we've got. Should we just kind of go through them as we remember their names?
Yeah,
Talk about their roles and their personalities. I guess I feel like their personalities are pretty important to the discussion, so we should get people up to speed. So the obvious main one is Jerry Garcia, who
named
is
after the ice cream.
Yeah, who is I guess I don't even know. You don't want to call him the leader or the creative force because that is untrue in so many ways. He's more like the center of gravity for the group rather than any like clear. He's not like it's not like a Lennon McCartney kind of thing where he would. Does that kind of make sense?
Yeah, well,
I think so.
The like only member of the group that had any like sense of charisma to himself. Like well, because if you watch like the Woodstock documentary, their Woodstock performance isn't great, but he's featured in it a lot because it's Jerry Garcia. On the cover of the first Grateful Dead record, the biggest face on there is Jerry Garcia.
Touch of Grey.
Yeah.
In the music video, he was the star of the music video.
Because like a lot of the like most well-known Grateful Dead songs ended up just being sung by Jerry, and sort of the way that not American, but just like music culture works in general. People remember the people who sing, and Jerry sings a lot of like the most well-known Grateful Dead songs. And on top of that, again, he was the only one with any like sense of charisma. They were all charismatic in their own ways, but Jerry was the only one who was like sort of talking to cameras and all that stuff. And you go up to anybody on the street and you say the Grateful Dead, they'll think Jerry Garcia or they'll say Jerry Garcia.
And he, in the really good documentary that's on Amazon, the Long Strange Trip documentary, there's an excerpt from an interview where he talks about like the pursuit of fun as the defining factor of his life. Like he realized as a kid that he wanted to pursue things that are fun and weird and different. And I think that's really interesting that he would identify that as such an early thing. It's like, just like, wanting to have fun more than being rigid. But he didn't necessarily write the lyrics to the songs he's most famous for singing. That would, of course, be Robert Hunter, who a lot of people haven't heard of if they're not actually Dead fans.
Yeah. I wouldn't be able to say his name. I knew that there was a like chief lyricist. I was just able to bring up.
There's two non-musician lyricists. But the first, Robert Hunter, is this guy who was like a bluegrass folky with Garcia early on in the Bay Area, and they just were lifelong. They became lifelong friends, and Robert Hunter is one of the best lyricists, I think, of all time. I think that he has just a natural sense of, like, I don't know. It's really hard to explain. The weird Americana that he kind of is so good at writing. I think a lot of people would be surprised to learn that he's the Grateful Dead guy and not not like Walt Whitman or someone like that,
Yeah, no, he was definitely in touch with like this like sort of Americana of a lot of the songs when you listen to them, it makes you feel in touch with sort of like, I don't know, like the 1900s in America, and like you're just waking up in San Francisco and there's like a horse pulling a streetcar, and then it's like dusty, and also you're making liquor in your bathtub. I don't know, but
you're on the run from the cops because you're a bigamist.
Exactly. Utah, baby. But I think the smartest thing the Grateful Dead ever did was just get separate lyricists that weren't band members, because God, they cannot write their own lyrics. They tried on their first album, it didn't work.
Yeah, it's just very just psychedelic kind of
proto hippie kind of shit.
Yeah,
See
Yeah.
that girl?
exactly.
But then after Jerry, bless his heart, came Bob Weir, the cowboy that they had to beg to stay in high school.
Yeah,
And
he
Mike-
was. Yeah, go ahead.
Oh no, I was just saying he's definitely, I think whenever I talk about the dead, he's always the guy I go to first, and I'm like a huge Bobby Weir fanboy. A lot of people in my life can attest to that. I bought half the reason I have a rip off of the Gibson ES335, which is the guitar that like Chuck Berry and stuff used. Half the reason why that I ended up getting that guitar was like, oh, I saw Bob Weir use that in like 1972 on video, and I was like, oh, I want that tone. But I think he's a really interesting portion of this group, and with a lot of rock music, you know, he has the position of rhythm guitar, and with a lot of rock music, rhythm guitar just sort of entails playing your standard chords. Like Malcolm Young was a rhythm guitarist, and he just played the straight up bar chords over AC/DC tracks. Bob Weir, though, because he got fired from the band, technically to scare him into being better, when they were like getting into like weird jammy stuff, they had like a sit down with Bob Weir and then another member we'll get to later. They sat down, they're like, oh, you're not keeping up, you're out of the band. And so what Bob Weir did was learn a bunch of jazz chords, because he started listening to jazz pianists like McCoy Tyner,
Yeah, McCoy Tyner.
Oscar Peterson, and stuff like that. So he started listening to a bunch of that stuff and translating it to guitar. And when you listen to shows, when you go like 1970, and then especially when you get to 74, he's playing these really weird chords that like no man should he be able to like make with his hand on guitar.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
If you watch live footage of him, he's moving just up and down the neck, just playing these like crazy chord voicings. It doesn't make sense. Like, if you're gonna try and just like jam along to a Dead track, you have to just do it by ear, because if you try and like suss out the video and be like, okay, so like he's making this chord, you're never ever going to figure it out, because it's just an insane puzzle.
And then on top of that, he's like bending whole chords, because the whole with guitar, to make it sound interesting and better, you bend like strings and whatnot, and when you solo you bend. But he's taking 4 fingers and he's just bending a whole chord, and those guitars are super chunky, and he just totally redefined what rhythm guitar is supposed to be. And I think in terms of like rhythm guitar, he should be the guy that you look at, because he really defined that role. Because he's still laying down a rhythm, and he's laying down just a bass for everybody else to jam off of. But his bass is so interesting; it's almost like it almost might as well just be another lead. He's just leading chords.
Let's hear the next track.
Yeah, and then we can get into the other members.
Yeah. Fine, I can't.
Of the queen shine.
That was actually perfect timing with that, because that was Bob Weir soloing. Wow, yeah, that was good timing. That part right there is absolutely in my adult life 100% what sold me on like this entire band in general. It was just, I don't know, that solo was just so catchy and uppy, but it still kept with the song and did a lot of like really interesting things with it that you weren't expecting out of that track. Because if you listen to the rest of it, it's like do 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 do
Yeah.
do do and stuff like that, and super bouncy and psych like. And
Was that part the lead into the rider part
yeah, so
when the tempo kind of changes?
yeah, so the way that they did play that song, they would do China Cat, and then
Which is kind of
Pre-hi-
that like bouncing kind of like funk almost.
yeah, it was it's really fun. It's sort of like, I don't know, I imagine it when I listen to it, it's sort of like a plane taking off almost for me. It's like
Mm-hmm.
the runway is the straight China Cat, and then the takeoff part, it's like you're taking off but you're going 90 degrees. And the takeoff is when Bobby starts soloing. It's just like they unhook and they get really, it's not weird with it, but it's like this fun sort of bouncy type feeling. And I think that's sort of what drew me into the Dead, was that it was fun and it was bouncy. Everybody, when I was working at the Dimple in Elk Grove, I had these views about the Dead, about them being just sort of like, I'm not going to listen to Dark Star. What are they? Is that like 5 hours long? But then you hear this and it's like, oh no, this is catchy, this is fun. And I think the worst thing to happen post hiatus was that in other versions of that song, that Bob Weir solo went away. And I mean, I love post hiatus China Cats, but that one in particular from '74, they went on hiatus in '75 for those people who don't know. That the pre hiatus China Cats with Bobby's solo is just, I don't know, it's just something else to me. It's really special. That's really cheesy, but it's special. It's so good.
I get it. I absolutely get it. It
Yeah.
has a certain like unpredictability to it. That's what
Yeah.
I've been enjoying about these live things, is like I can see the appeal in the journey and the discovery that you have, both as an audience participator, but like imagining yourself in their shoes, because you
Mhm.
feel like that's a discovery for them too. In
Mhm.
that moment, you know.
And it's so funny because they don't remember it. Like either because they were fucked up at the time, or just because they like in the moment, like they're not going to remember what
I mean,
they did in that like solo in the middle of like a half-hour Dark Star.
Yeah.
And so that with we were talking about Dick Watvala, like he was digging up these shows and finding these moments in them that the band had no idea existed, like that they never would have considered for release. Like,
Yeah.
let alone there would be like, people like RJ that would be, obsessing over like this particular 30 seconds of this one time that they played this one song. Yeah.
No, and it
But I mean,
it
that's
does.
improv for you, because I mean, if you're going to talk to like a great, like comedy improviser or something of great note, and you bring up some show that they did, not like a TV appearance, but just a show,
Right.
they're not going to know anything you said, nor should they. Like
Exactly.
in this moment, and then you move the hell on. Like
There's a bit, and there's a David Letterman interview with Bob and Jerry in like, I think 82 or something like that, and they talk about because taper culture was starting to develop and sort of enter the mainstream like thought.
mhm.
And they were talking about how do you feel about taping, and their philosophy was just sort of like after we're done, it's just everybody else's music. And I think that's what let them jam so much. And I think that's also why they forgot a lot of the music, was just because at the end of the day, they knew the songs that they wanted to play and they knew what they wanted to do. And then after that, it was anybody's game on either what was done with the music after that, or just what they did with the songs themselves personally afterwards. And I think that's really neat, is that there's just sort of like this, there is a consistency within live shows, where if you listen to a certain run of shows, certain parts of songs will sound the same or very similar, but there's always just like a little difference of that, and there is like a true improvisation to it that they would just genuinely forget.
Yeah.
You
I
know,
think it's worth mentioning, like, the stark contrast of the Dead versus Zappa,
Mhm.
particularly in regards to their appreciation of the culture around it. Of like, it's more generous. It's giving of just like you said about how like once we did it, it's not really ours as much anymore. It's kind of out there. Whereas I know Zappa was on the record of like, don't buy the bootlegs. If you weren't
Yeah.
there, you don't deserve to listen to the solos. That's what makes it special. And that's completely absurd. Like,
yeah.
you did it. So yeah, I don't know.
And you know, if either A, the Dead weren't recording these 2-track soundboards, or B, if these people were just sitting in audiences recording, you know, a lot of this music just wouldn't exist. And
Yeah.
you know, I think that's why I love taper culture so much, is that there's actually, I included 2 audience tapes on this playlist.
Which we will probably not get to.
Yeah, because we've been
That's
talking-
okay.
It's okay. We have to get there's one from '74 that we absolutely have to listen to. It's The Eyes of the World that's on here.
Cool.
Well, seeing as we have time for probably one more clip and then appropriate amount of chat after, let's get that one queued up. If you're
Okay.
needing that, let's get that queued, so that way we don't feel forced into it later.
Yeah. Well, because we're talking about taping, we're talking about audiences, and we're still talking about like the magic of the Dead and stuff like that. I included this. There's this Eyes of the World on here from their '74 tour, which was the Wall of Sound tour, and the last tour they did before hiatus.
And the Wall of Sound was this massive literal wall of amplifiers that was engineered. Owsley Stanley, he engineered it, right?
Yeah. So
The guy who's like responsible for most of the LSD that like made its way into the world in
Before
the 60s.
before I let you guys get into it, this was of course the one track that didn't have a time cue. So
the Eyes. Oh, I'm sorry.
That's all right.
It was just 12:45.
12:45. All right.
Yeah.
This guy Owsley Stanley III, who was one of the main producers of LSD in the 60s, was also just this weird like electrician genius who cobbled together this insane, if you see pictures of it, it's a wall. It's not 3 amps stacked on top of one another. It's a veritable like climbing wall of amplifiers.
Now,
It's
was this
crazy.
assembled for each show, or was it one piece that somehow fit into a truck?
So the way that they did it was because the stacks went as high as 32 feet, which is about the height of like a standing bass wave. So what it was, they had 2 trucks and they had 2 different walls, and they would leapfrog over each other. So say, for example, we'll just use the American tour. If they were in, they went from Florida to to Boston. So what they would do is they would pack one wall up and then send the other wall ahead so that they could set up. And the way that setting up went was, they would get there like at 6 a.m., have to set up this entire thing, be done by around 4 p.m. for sound check. And then after the show was over, immediately start taking everything down and then sending the next truck over. Good segue too, because
And their road crew is like a band. Like they have their own kind of legends unto themselves.
I'm sure. Because I'm sure they have a lot more contact with the audience than the band would, so they're going to be their own characters.
Last in, first out.
Yeah. The real first responders.
Exactly. That's what Ramrod was. No, but this track is actually this whole technical discussion is actually a really good segue into like how that wall sounded and what the Dead did technically, like literally technically, not just like instrument playing.
Yeah.
Let's hear it.
Let's just give this track a listen. But oh man, that Eyes of the World is so good. I actually had to splice together and upload that track myself because that particular recording wasn't on YouTube. So I sat there for like 20 minutes just aligning everything to make sure it was right. So I picked that one in particular for 3 reasons actually. One was because Phil Lesh gets a bass solo, and Phil Lesh basically played bass like nobody. No, one, he played it like nobody else. He was just like, oh, the bass, that's just another lead instrument. And like in rock conjecture, it's like, no, it's not. You play rhythm, buddy. With him, he's like, yeah, fuck that. And so you get to hear Phil's bass solo, which is just phenomenal, especially in Eyes of the World. 2, you get to hear what the wall of sound sounds like, because in a lot of soundboard recordings, it's not that it gets sterilized or anything, but the wall of sound was definitely something that came through better in audience recordings than it did in terms of soundboards, because the wall of sound was just this massive PA system that I think the best way to have experienced it was to have been there, which is unfortunate because with a lot of things about the Dead, I say, oh yeah, just download the tape, whatever, man. But with the wall of sound, it's just like you hear it, you hear audience tapes of it, but it's like it's still something that should have been like I think experienced like in person.
Yeah.
But with that tape in particular, with that audience recording, because it sounds great outdoors. There's a recording from July 21st at the Hollywood Bowl, which sounds phenomenal because the guy shot it from like I think all the way in the back of the amphitheater, and it sounds great because the wall could project. But then you take it to indoor venues, and they did a short European tour with this wall, and this is from one of the shows they did in London at the Alexandra Palace. What's cool about this tape in particular is that not only do you get to hear what the wall would have sounded like, you get to hear how it would have reverberated sound around the room, because out of every Grateful Dead audience tape that I have listened to, and that's probably too many, but out of all the ones that I've listened to, that tape in particular, just you get so much room ambience, and it really there's a lot of tapes that will give you the feeling of being there, but this tape in particular actually gives you the feeling of being there because you get the room ambience and you get the way that sound bounces off the walls and what would have been like opera music or anything like that, and sticking a 32-foot high PA system and something like that is just, you can't do that now, and that's only something the Dead would have done because they had this weird obsession with trying to get like pure sound and trying to get to people what their instruments sounded like. And they weren't like, you know, they were big on like MIDI and stuff and pedals in the 80s, but before then it was just like 32 feet bass stack, man, and we'll just play loud, it's fine, whatever.
Yeah.
And it's just that 74 that entire tour is just unlike anything that has ever come or maybe even will come. Like, because
there's some Phil bombs, which is what, you know, the learned call Phil's bass solos. There's some Phil bombs that the closest, and I mean this in a positive sense, but like the closest point of comparison would almost be something like club music or like dubstep, like just crazy bass sounds that are coming from just a guy playing his bass guitar.
Yeah, Phil Lesh shows me new speakers.
Yeah.
Well, there have been instances where I'll like play the Dead in my car and I'll turn it up, and then the bass is like zzz, 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 like rattling and shaking, and everybody looks and is like, "What's that?" I'm like, "Yeah, don't worry about it. It's the Dead." But yeah, no, Phil Lesh's bass is absolutely insane. His drops are just. I've read stories from people, and I've heard from people who have like been at shows when they would. I talked to a guy who was actually at the Winterland performances, who was who definitely had like hearing issues later in life, and like I had to like talk super loud to him because of that. But he was like at the entire winter. Excuse me. He was at the entire Winterland run, which was like 4 or 5 days worth of shows. And
are you talking about the ones that were the 74 ones that made it into the movie?
Yeah, so he was there.
Yeah, that was 5 shows.
Yeah, and he was there for all of that, and like Phil's bass is just super loud, and especially with that stack, and I was like, wow, how do you hear still? And he was like, magic, and but yeah, no, I just people's teeth would probably chatter. I don't know. The only thing I can compare it to is that I saw Boris live once, and I was in the front row, and I had earplugs in, and I still had ringing ears when I left the show that night. Uh, Phil, insane guy, love him.
Yeah, Phil. Before we close things out, we should maybe cover Phil and Pigpen.
Oh,
Phil, Pigpen, and Bill, just so that we can get the like core group, and then if we ever reconvene for Dead Talk, we can cover
I
later.
Make that a point. Like this,
we
is
can
really
cover
the
later
first
keyboardists and stuff like that.
having
So
you on
we're talking about Phil. That's Phil Lesh, the bassist of the group, who is. There's a shirt with Phil on it. He's a nerd. Like Phil is a big nerd. He has a background in like avant-garde classical music. Through reading about Phil Lesh, I got into Charles Ives, which was really the first classical music that I sought out myself and enjoyed. Because prior to that, I'd only heard like Christmas music and stereotypical classical music in movies and stuff like that. And so this was the first time I'd heard of like avant-garde classical music for myself. And he is, he's kind of the cantankerous like Grouch of the group, I'd say. Like he's the one that has been the most vocal in steering the group's legacy post Garcia's death in 1995. He's the one that has kind of been, depending on who you ask, like the stick in the mud, or he's just kind of grouchy. He's known for being a little grouchy and a little difficult to work with, but he's also maybe like the only certifiable like musical genius in the band, like compositional genius.
Yeah.
Would you go with that, RJ?
Definitely, because like I've actually started playing bass and stuff myself recently, and how to like learn. I've actually been listening to some Dead stuff, and you get the gist of it. But with Phil's playing, and again, half the reason why I like the Grateful Dead is because of Phil Lesh. He's not the traditional thought of bass playing, as I said earlier, was just sort of like, you play the rhythm, you play chords, you play roots, and maybe a blues scale, and then you just call it a day. No, Phil Lesh is not satisfied with that. The trumpet player has to put in, I don't know, name like a scale or mode, and then he's going to do like 3 variations on that. In his autobiography, he talks about how he'll start with, when he's listening to like a track when they're playing live, he'll start with the roots, and then just kind of go off and just whatever works musically. And he anticipates what Jerry's going to play, because Jerry is obviously, because he's lead guitar, one of the focal points. But he anticipates that, and he's listening to what Bob's doing. He's listening to what whatever the keyboardist at the time is doing, and he's playing along with that. And he lays down these tracks that, if you isolate them, they would make no sense. But when they're heard within the context of the group, they sound amazing. We didn't get to it, but there's a cover of Minglewood Blues that's on here, where the intro comes in with everybody and Phil's bass playing, and Phil's bass is just, I isolated it, and it just does not sound on key with the rest of it. But
it's almost like Phil is playing every note that will, no pun intended, like fill in a space in the song. Exactly. Like it's like everywhere that there's like a possible little weird note that someone else isn't playing but will somehow magically fit within the jam, like Phil seems to exclusively play those notes at a speed that is like, would put like death metal guys to like shame.
Yeah, no, he's insane. And then there's Billy. He's the drummer.
Yeah, Bill the drummer. There's not a whole lot to him except that he's just kind of Bill the drummer. He's kind of goofy. Yeah,
he's Bill.
I don't really know that much about Bill from a biographical standpoint. I know that he's got he had a background in like rhythm and blues.
Yeah, so like he's super sturdy in that, and half the reason why when you listen to a lot of tracks where it's just him playing drums, where the why they can change beat on like sort of like a dime is because he's just has this like solid bass in R&B music that, you know, he can just sort of do whatever. And I think because Phil's doing his own thing, he definitely lays down the entire rhythm of the group, and he provides this super sturdy bass that everyone can just go off of. And, you know, he can change beats on a dime, he can transition, he can do all these things. And I think he's the only solely, even as a rhythm player, he's not doing strictly rhythm. We'd have to get into, you know, 80s Dead and drum space and all that. But
Yeah.
long story short is that he definitely holds things down, and I think he is a phenomenal drummer. And I think that, you know, we laugh, oh, Bill the drummer. I think, you know, at the end of the day, he does indeed deserve a lot of credit for sort of guiding jams to
Mhm.
stay on course. It's sort of like everybody decided they want to be a pilot, and then Bill is like, oh, we should also maybe have a navigational guy, and he's the nav guy.
Yeah.
I like that analogy.
And the last original member,
Oh,
of course, is hey, I just realized Grateful Dead has two of our namesakes. It has a Jerry and a Ron.
Ronald.
Yeah, but we're of course talking about Ron Pigpen McKernan,
McKernan. Oh, I love
who
that man.
was a foul-smelling, tough-looking, but very, very sweet son of a DJ, right?
Yeah, he was
Of
the
a Bay Area DJ.
yeah, he was the son of a blues DJ, and when they first started out, you could basically just call the Grateful Dead Pigpen with the Grateful Dead.
Hmm. He was
Um,
he was like the Sid Barrett or Brian Jones or
Brian
Who are
Jones
the-
is a good analogy.
yeah, who are the other people? Kind of the soul of the band early on.
I think Brian Jones would be sort of like a solid thing because early
The traditionalist kind of.
Yeah, early Stones is like, you know, R&B covers and stuff like that. Well, Pigpen was really into the blues, and when the Dead first started, and this goes for a lot of 60 bands too, when they first started, they were super into the blues, and they would, you know, work blues covers into their sets. But I think because I don't know what it is about Pig. I think maybe growing up with a dad as a blues DJ, or just being
Like,
in touch with it.
according to the Long Strange Trip biography by Dennis McNally, Pigpen, like as a teenager, and you know, I haven't seen anything to disprove this, as you know, as fantastic as it sounds. Teenage Pigpen was just kind of like palling around the Bay Area with like Bay Area blues legends, just kind of hanging out with these like old, like middle-aged black guys.
Yeah, no.
This chubby little white kid named Pigpen.
And, you know,
Which is just it's so interesting that any grain of that could be true. It just seems so made up. It's like out of like Walk Hard.
yeah. And I don't know. I think so. I mean, I like a lot of the Grateful Dead, but easily one of my favorite members is Pigpen. When I worked at the Dimple in Roseville, we had this flat screen that would occasionally flash pictures, and one of them was the Dead, and Pigpen was in the picture. And every time I saw that picture, it would just make me smile. And there's just something about him that half the reason why they put him on T-shirts is that he uses charisma. But you just look at him, and I look at him, and I just sort of feel happy. It's just like, oh, I love this guy. And I hear him rap, and I hear him go off on blues tangents, and I hear him play harmonica, and I hear him do all these things, and I don't know, it sort of warms my soul. And he's just sort of like in touch with, I don't know, I think he, like, out of all the people, like the white guys that got into the blues in the 60s, I think easily he was the person that was like most in touch with it.
And most like authentic about it.
Yeah.
It like he really like lived this sounds so corny. But I think that he really did live the music in a way that a lot of other like blues inspired people in the 60s didn't.
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
definitely. You know, the whole
We were talking about that a couple shows ago with Pigpen and Janis Joplin. Like
Yeah.
how opposed to their peers that were kind of more about mind expansion and all that stuff, they just wanted to black out in a bar. Like
Yeah.
they were just hard. They were hard people.
and
And
it's
Pigpen was just a really like powerhouse vocalist. Like he has a weird singing voice, but the fact that he can take a song like Good Lovin', which is a pretty simple, repetitive song that,
Mm-hmm.
and it's like most popular version, the Young Rascals version is like 2.5 minutes. If the fact that they can stretch that out to like a 20-minute jam and it's mostly just Pigpen like mumbling into the microphone and it's improvised lyrics, like it's strangely compelling. And the fact that he was like, despite his lack of like technical musical prowess, like he was technically the keyboardist organist, but he was never that proficient at it. But like he still had that skill at improvisation. It was just with his like personality and his vocals. He could like close out a show like no one else with like a long jam of just Pigpen rapping. It's great.
And I think that goes into his whole blues thing, because after I got into the Dead, I ended up getting into a lot of like these old blues guys, and with a lot of blues, especially a lot of the like the early like 30s Delta blues and stuff like that. Half of it is just sort of you have the guitar chords and then you improvise the lyrics yourself. And when you start going back and forth between, say, like Blind Lemon Jefferson doing a track and then just sort of like going off on whatever he thinks, and then you hear Pigpen doing Good Lovin' and telling there's one version where he just sort of like tells the story about meeting up with a friend and buying like a refrigerator or something like that. And it's got this beautiful background and everything like that, but then there's Pigpen improvising over it, and there's just something about him. He just has this gift for improvisation that I think nobody in the 60s, whether they were even doing blues rock or anything like that, had a gift for. Everyone had a small gift for improvising on like the guitar or whatever, but Pigpen, he could get up on stage, do something, and then riff on
he didn't have to do acid to improvise. Everyone else did.
Yeah.
That's what happens when you drink like a quart of whiskey.
Well, RJ, thank you so much for being on the show. We really appreciate it. And like I said earlier, this is just the first installment of having you on.
Yeah.
The Dead is so encompassing that this will be, maybe every couple months or so we'll have you come back.
Yeah, no, I'm sorry we didn't get to the majority of these tracks, but I still had a lot of fun doing this, and I think maybe if we ever do more, we could definitely at least just go through like 5 songs on this playlist.
Yeah.
Now, before we let you go, is there anything you want to plug, or like an Instagram handle, or what you're up to these days, or anything?
Well, I have to stay in business and keep a job, so the first thing I'll plug is the record store I work at, which is Medium Rare Records, and on Instagram we're Medium Rare _records, and
is it a location, or is it like a mail order site or something?
We have one location off of R&11th in the Wall building. We're the only business open right now. We're keeping it super safe because everybody's getting sick, which is, and the point is that come in. We have a lot of cool records. I actually bought a few Grateful Dead vinyl bootlegs over there. We got a lot of classic rock, dad rock stuff, jazz, blues, everything but the kitchen sink and maybe, I don't know, a First Press Funkadelic. And then the other thing I would plug is the band that I'm in, which is not a jam band. It's Anime Aliens.
You're Aliens, right on. Cool.
I am one half of the guitars. We're Anime Aliens SAC, in just all one word. Charlie, the guy who is the main person and he does all the recordings, is like, oh wow, a powerhouse in terms of like technical ability and recording. I just do the live stuff. He records everything by himself, and he does both harmonies, and he's just an amazing guitarist, and I'm so happy to be able to play in that kind of stuff. And that's all I have to plug. Don't smoke weed, you get into the Grateful Dead, basically.
Right on. Well, thank you everyone at home for watching. I hope this was as illuminating for you as it was for me. Have a good night and catch us next week. Bye-bye.
See ya.
All right.
See ya.
And thank you all for checking out 6 O'Clock Dad Rock. I'm going to send you over to... I just recently found... Oh, no, that's going to... Court, you're going to mess up the screen. Oh, no. It's anarchy now. That's all right. I'll go to the pre-show that I didn't change. I'm going to send you guys over to... I just found a club in Atlanta Dad's Garage in Atlanta. They stream some stuff. It looks like starting at 7 was Under the Influence with Mike Schatz, featuring Amber Nash from Archer. So go ahead and enjoy some of that. We've got more stuff coming up. Oh, wait, I didn't switch over, so it's still those broken boxes. We got more stuff coming up all weekend. Check us out again. But in the meantime, let me raid you guys over to Dad's Garage in Atlanta and have fun with that. Thanks for joining us. Check in the rest of the week here. Oh, wait, that's not the right button. That's the right button. Oh, no. Oh, wait, did they quit? Oh. Oh. They went away. All right. Then you guys are gonna go to West Side Comedy. Thanks, guys. Sorry for for being difficult.
All right, I'm leaving. Fare thee well.
Oh, I'm trying to get you guys over to Dad's Garage. It won't let me raid you to them. Maybe, I mean, we're following them, but maybe we don't know them well enough. Let's do it this way. There it is. Go check out the show. Check out a cool club in Atlanta. And come back the rest of the weekend. We've got lots of great stuff going on. Uh-oh. They might not be raidable. Thanks for hanging in there, guys. I'm trying. Oh. Twitch, make this easy. There we go. Let's see if it works just as a message. There it is. Okay. So, everybody jump in the raid. Well, it looks like it was working earlier. It just didn't show me here. Sorry, guys. Thanks for putting up with it. I would go on camera, but I'm not camera ready. That's not. See you guys.